Okay, in the first hour of our program, I laid out my theory about why white culture is more predatory than cultures that emerged in places that basically don't have winter or don't have long, hard winters. And that is that, and I just, a thought just occurred to me that kind of blew that up, and then I thought, no, it doesn't. It actually confirms it, and that would be the people that used to be referred to as Eskimos. Now it turns out that was a slur. They're Inuits, the native people of the extreme north, that historically, they didn't have kings and kingdoms, right? And yet they live in the far north. So how did that happen? Well, they still live tribally. So they're still basically, now not so much. Now we're shipping in macaroni and cheese and crappy food, and they're struggling with diabetes and hypertension and heart disease and cancer and all the things that come with the crappy food that we provide to people when we decide to be generous. But my point is that at some point, locking up the food became the deal. Right? How do we lock up the food? This is Daniel Quinn talks about this in his book Ishmael years ago, almost a decade ago, more than a decade ago. How did they lock up the food, and what did they do? Now, one of the things that I found fascinating living in Germany for a year back in the mid 80s, 86, 87, was traveling around. We lived in a little town in the middle of nowhere. It was called Stadtsteinach, and it was a little town of maybe 25,000 people or something like that, and the nearest town, it might have even been half that size. And the nearest big town, which was still a little tiny town, was Kulmbach. But we were in what was called Kreis Kulmbach. In other words, County Kulmbach or Region Kulmbach, because Kulmbach was where the castle was. It's also where the best beer in the world is brewed, but Kulmbacher beer. But the castle was there. And I learned some of the history of the region, and it was fascinating. There was a castle in Kulmbach. There was a castle in Bayreuth. There was a castle in what were some of the other towns? There was an old castle ruin right in Stadtsteinach, although it had not been occupied since around the year 1000. It was called I forget what it was called. Anyway, there was a castle there as well. But what used to happen is the kings wanted to get the serfs, the peons, wanted to get them to help build a bigger castle, right? The king's already rich. He's already got the castle, but he wants a bigger castle, a fancier castle. The castle in Kulmbach is one hell of a fancy castle. The castle in Bayreuth, not so much. Well, it's not. It's pretty impressive, too. So what would the king do? Well, the castle, the king of Kulmbach and the king of Kulmbach would kind of in back channels get together and say, hey, let's have a war with each other. But not quite. Just enough to scare the peasants so they will build the larger castle so that if they think that one of us is going to invade the other, that the castle will be big enough that the entire town's population can hide inside its walls. And so by having these low-level wars, for hundreds of years in some cases, just constant low-level warfare, what this did is it created an environment where the serfs were willing to give some of their food and some of their crops and to show up for a couple of months every year and do construction work, all for free, to the local lord or the local king. This is the exact same thing that's happening today. Whether it was the Vietnam War, whether it was Bush and LBJ lying us into the Vietnam War, George W. Bush lying us into the Iraq War, identify an enemy, freak out about them, and the citizens will give you their stuff, including the bodies of their children, right, to go fight that. We've lost, 5,000 U.S. soldiers so far as a result of George W. Bush's decision to lie us into a war in Iraq? Keep the wars going, and you can stay rich. And in fact, there's a piece of this, arguably, in the news I don't know what I did with it. But that increasingly this was the New York Times piece today. It was a New York Times piece. I can't find it, but I can tell you from memory. The New York Times, they were talking about how this war that is going on in the Middle East right now, in Yemen and Libya and Iraq and Syria, just the region. That regional war is increasingly being fought as a proxy war between large Sunni superpowers, Saudi Arabia mainly, and in a more minor way, Qatar, UAE, whatnot, and the Shia Iran. Now, the thing that the New York Times was commenting about today is that this has been a bonanza for U.S. weapon makers because we supply Saudi Arabia with their military, and they have the third largest military budget in the world, which means they're buying a hell of a lot of hardware from the United States. Our fancy jets, our fancy weapon systems, our fancy missiles. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And, once again, war as an excuse to spy on you, war as an excuse to oppress you, war as an excuse not to rebuild our infrastructure, war as an excuse not, hey, Bush spent $2 trillion. Probably when all is said and done, it'll be $6 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. Money that could have put every student in America, including every minority student every student who is capable and wants to go to college, through college for free. Our entire national tuition bill for public colleges every year in the United States is $61 billion. A trillion is 1,000 billion. We're spending $6 trillion on these wars. We can put everybody to school for free. We could give everybody affordable housing. We got all these houses in foreclosure. Why don't we do what FDR did? Buy them up and sell them out, sell them back to people. I mean, there's so many things that we could do that would make this country a better place that we're not doing because of the power of wealth.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program.